The day my son's wife called my pearls embarrassing fake nonsense was the same day I finally decided to get them properly appraised. What happened next left my entire family speechless and fighting over jewelry they'd spent years insulting. I was sitting at the head of the mahogany dining table that had belonged to my mother, the same table where 4 generations of women had shared meals, laughter, and tears. The Sunday roast was getting cold, but nobody seemed to care about the food. All eyes were on my neck, specifically on the strand of pearls that had been my grandmother's pride and joy for over 70 years. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, was staring at them with the kind of expression you'd reserve for roadkill. "Betty, honey," she said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension reserved for the elderly. "Those pearls are, well, they're obviously fake. You can tell from here. The way they catch the light? That's not how real pearls behave." My son Marcus nodded along like a bobblehead, desperate to keep peace with his wife of 2 years. My daughter Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair but said nothing. Only my youngest granddaughter Emma looked confused by the sudden tension that had descended over our family meal like a thick fog. But here's what none of them knew yet. The pearls around my neck weren't just any pearls. They were Mikimoto pearls, purchased by my grandfather in 1952 from the original Mikimoto store in Tokyo during his service in post-war Japan. The receipt, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved, was still tucked safely in my jewelry box upstairs. Each pearl was perfectly round, with a lustrous surface that could only come from decades of careful cultivation in Japanese waters. Jessica continued her assault on my family heirlooms, with the confidence of someone who had never owned anything more valuable than a Pandora bracelet. "I mean, look at that clasp. It's so obviously costume jewelry. You should really consider getting some nicer pieces, Betty. Nothing wrong with looking your age, but there's no need to look cheap." The words hit me like a slap across the face. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the pearls, feeling their cool weight against my collarbone. These weren't just pearls. They were a connection to the women who came before me, a tangible link to a family history that stretched back generations. "Jessica," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, "these pearls have been in my family for over 70 years. She laughed, actually laughed, the sound sharp and mocking in the quiet dining room. "Oh, Betty, just because something's old doesn't mean it's valuable. My grandmother had costume jewelry too. There's no shame in it." That's when Marcus decided to join the attack. "Mom, you know we love you, but Jessica's right. Those pearls, they're not fooling anyone. Maybe it's time to invest in some quality pieces, something that won't embarrass you when you go out." The betrayal cut deep. This was my son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died, the child I had worked 3 jobs to put through college, and now he was sitting at my table, eating food I had prepared, suggesting that I was somehow embarrassing him with jewelry that had been treasured in our family for decades. But the worst was yet to come. Sarah finally found her voice, but not to defend me. "Actually, Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about your jewelry. Some of it is so outdated. Maybe we could go shopping together, find you some nice contemporary pieces that would suit you better." Emma, bless her heart, piped up with the innocence of youth. "But Grandma's pearls are beautiful. They look like the ones in the old movies." Jessica turned to Emma with a patronizing smile. "Sweetie, those are just pretend pearls. Real pearls cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Your grandma's are just plastic made to look fancy." The room fell silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I could feel something breaking inside me, not just my heart, but something deeper. It was the moment I realized that my own family saw me as nothing more than a foolish old woman with delusions of grandeur. I stood up slowly, my napkin falling to the floor like a white flag of surrender. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think I've heard enough for one evening." As I walked toward the stairs, I heard Jessica whisper to Marcus, "She's so sensitive about it. Maybe we should have been gentler." Gentle? There was nothing gentle about dismantling a woman's dignity at her own dinner table, but they had no idea what they had just unleashed. That night I sat in my bedroom staring at the jewelry box that had been my mother's, then my grandmother's, and now mine. The pearls lay coiled in their velvet-lined compartment, like a sleeping serpent, innocent and beautiful despite the venom that had been spat at them just hours before. I picked up each piece one by one, remembering the stories behind them. The emerald ring my grandfather had brought back from Colombia. The diamond bracelet my father had saved for months to buy my mother for their 10th anniversary. The ruby brooch that had been a wedding gift from my husband's grandmother. To my family, these were nothing more than costume jewelry, trinkets picked up at garage sales and flea markets. But I knew better. I had always known better. I walked to my writing desk and pulled out a piece of stationery. With shaking hands, I began to write. Dear Tiffany & Co. Estate Services. But that's when something unexpected happened. As I was sealing the envelope, my phone rang. It was Emma, my granddaughter, calling from her bedroom, where she was supposed to be doing homework. Grandma? Her voice was small and uncertain. Are you okay? You seemed really sad at dinner. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. At least one member of my family still had a heart. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Grandma, I think your pearls are beautiful. Can you tell me the story about them again? The one about great-great-grandmother and the man from Japan. And so I did. I told her about my grandfather's service in post-war Japan, about how he had fallen in love with the craftsmanship of Mikimoto pearls, about how he had saved every penny of his military pay to buy them for his wife back home. I told her about how my grandmother had worn them to every important occasion for 50 years, and how my mother had passed them down to me with tears in her eyes. Neither did I, Emma. Neither did I. After I hung up, I looked at the letter again. Something had changed in those few minutes on the phone with Emma. This wasn't just about proving my family wrong anymore. This was about preserving the truth of our family history, about ensuring that the stories and the treasures passed down through generations weren't dismissed as worthless fantasies. I sealed the letter and set it on my nightstand. Tomorrow, I would mail it to Tiffany & Co. in New York City. What I didn't know was that my letter would set in motion a chain of events that would turn my quiet life upside down. 3 weeks later, I was in my garden deadheading roses when a black sedan pulled into my driveway. A woman in an elegant navy suit stepped out, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She walked with the confident stride of someone accustomed to handling precious things. Mrs. Morrison? She called out. I'm Victoria Sterling from Tiffany & Co. Estate Services. We spoke on the phone? My heart began to race. When Victoria had called the week before to schedule this appointment, her voice had carried an excitement that she was trying very hard to suppress. Mrs. Morrison, based on your description and the photographs you sent, I believe a house call would be appropriate. Sometimes our most significant discoveries happen in the most unexpected places. Now here she was, standing in my driveway like an emissary from another world. Of course, please come in, I said, pulling off my gardening gloves. Can I offer you some tea? That would be lovely, thank you. As I prepared tea in my kitchen, Victoria examined the house with the practiced eye of someone who knew how to spot quality. Her gaze lingered on the antique furniture, the oil paintings on the walls, the crystal chandelier in the dining room. You have a beautiful home, Mrs. Morrison. Many of these pieces appear to be quite fine. I poured the tea with steady hands, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Thank you. Most of them have been in my family for generations. About your jewelry, Victoria said, settling into her chair with professional composure. I have to tell you, I've been in this business for 25 years, and your photographs caught my attention immediately. The pearls, in particular, may I see them? I had laid out all the pieces on the dining room table, each one carefully arranged on black velvet cloth. Victoria's eyes went wide the moment she saw them. But what happened next was something I never could have predicted. She picked up the pearl necklace with hands that were suddenly reverent, almost religious in their careful handling. She examined them with a jeweler's loupe, turning each pearl in the light, checking the clasp, the stringing, the overall condition. Mrs. Morrison, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, do you know what you have here? They were my grandmother's, I replied. My grandfather bought them in Japan. Victoria set down the pearls and picked up a manila folder from her briefcase. I took the liberty of doing some research after you sent the photographs. These aren't just Mikimoto pearls, Mrs. Morrison. Based on the specific characteristics, the size, the luster, the perfectly matched gradient, I believe these are from Mikimoto's 1952 Imperial Collection. Only 50 strands were ever made. The words hit me like a physical force. Imperial Collection? These pearls were specifically created for the Japanese imperial family and their guests. Your grandfather must have had very special access to acquire them. Miss Morrison, conservatively speaking, this necklace alone is worth between $120,000 to $150,000. The teacup slipped from my fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. But Victoria wasn't finished. She picked up the emerald ring next, examining it with the same intense focus. Colombian emeralds, probably from the Muzo mines, based on the color saturation. Unheated, which makes them incredibly rare. This setting is definitely Cartier, probably 1940s based on the styling. She reached for her folder again and pulled out what looked like auction records. A similar piece sold at Sotheby's last year for $85,000. I was grateful I was already sitting down. The diamond bracelet was next. Art Deco styling, definitely 1920s. These are old European cut diamonds, which means they were cut by hand before modern machinery. The clarity is exceptional. I'd estimate this at $60,000 to $70,000. Piece by piece, she worked through my collection. The ruby brooch, $40,000. The sapphire earrings, $35,000. The gold watch that had been my father's, $25,000. When she finished, Victoria looked at me with something approaching awe. "Mrs. Morrison, you're looking at a collection worth approximately $400,000, possibly more at auction." The room began to spin. $400,000. The jewelry my family had mocked as fake junk was worth nearly $500,000. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to ask you something important. Are you planning to keep these pieces? Or might you be interested in selling? Because I have to tell you, collectors and museums around the world would be very, very interested in this collection." Before I could answer, I heard the front door open. Marcus had his own key and often stopped by unannounced. Today of all days, he had decided to drop in for an impromptu visit. "Mom?" he called out. "Whose car is that in the driveway?" And suddenly my day was about to become very, very interesting. Marcus walked into the dining room with Jessica right behind him, their faces carrying that particular blend of curiosity and judgment that had become so familiar to me. They stopped dead when they saw Victoria in her expensive suit, surrounded by my jewelry laid out on the table like evidence in a courtroom.
"Oh," Jessica said,
Her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone she used when she was about to say something cutting. "Are you having a jewelry party, Betty? Like those home sales where they sell costume jewelry to seniors?" Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. Marcus, meanwhile, was staring at the jewelry spread across the table with a confused expression. "Mom, what's all this about? And who is this woman?" "I'm Victoria Sterling, from Tiffany & Co. Estate Services," Victoria said, standing and extending her hand. "I'm here to appraise Mrs. Morrison's jewelry collection." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Jessica's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Tiffany & Co.?" Marcus repeated slowly, like he was trying to process a foreign language. "The Tiffany & Co.? That's correct," Victoria replied smoothly. "Your mother contacted us regarding her jewelry, and I'm pleased to say we've made some quite remarkable discoveries today." Jessica's laugh was sharp and forced. "Discoveries? About Betty's costume jewelry? I think there might be some mistake." But Victoria was already reaching for her folder. "Actually, there's no mistake at all. Mrs. Morrison owns one of the most significant private jewelry collections I've encountered in my career. The Mikimoto pearl necklace alone is worth between $120,000 and $150,000. Marcus actually stumbled backward like he'd been physically struck. "What did you say?" "Your mother's pearl necklace is from Mikimoto's 1952 Imperial Collection. Only 50 strands were ever made, specifically for the Japanese imperial family. It's an extraordinary piece." Jessica's face had gone completely white. That's not possible. Those are fake pearls. I can tell from looking at them." Victoria's professional mask slipped just slightly, revealing a hint of steel underneath. "I assure you, madam, these are most certainly authentic. I've been appraising jewelry for 25 years, and I don't make mistakes about pieces of this caliber." I watched my son and daughter-in-law process this information, and I could see the exact moment when the reality hit them. All those years of mocking my fake junk, all those condescending comments about my embarrassing jewelry, all those suggestions that I needed to buy nicer pieces, they had been completely and utterly wrong. But what happened next was even more shocking. Marcus suddenly became very interested in the jewelry spread across the table. He picked up the emerald ring, the same ring he'd made fun of at Christmas, calling it a grocery store trinket, and examined it with newfound respect. This is really worth $85,000? He asked Victoria. "Conservatively, yes. At auction, It might bring considerably more. Jessica had moved closer to the table too, her eyes scanning the pieces with the intensity of someone calculating values. All of this is real. Every piece, Victoria confirmed. Mrs. Morrison, the total value of your collection is approximately $400,000. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. I watched my son and daughter-in-law exchange a look that I recognized immediately. It was the same look they'd given each other when they thought I couldn't see them going through my mail or discussing my finances in hushed tones. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice taking on a tone I hadn't heard in years. The tone he used to use when he wanted something from me. "This is incredible news. I had no idea these pieces were so valuable." "None of us did," Jessica added quickly, her earlier mockery completely forgotten. "Betty, this is wonderful. You must be so relieved to know your family heirlooms are worth so much." I looked at these two people who had spent years making me feel foolish and small, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. They weren't happy for me. They weren't apologetic about their past behavior. They were calculating. "Yes," I said quietly. "It is wonderful to know the truth." Victoria, who had been watching this family drama unfold with professional discretion, cleared her throat. "Mrs. Morrison, I do need to discuss next steps with you. As I mentioned, there would be significant interest in these pieces from collectors and museums. If you're considering selling—" "Selling?" Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp with alarm. "Mom, you're not thinking of selling family heirlooms, are you?" The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. These same family heirlooms that they'd been mocking as worthless junk for years were suddenly precious family treasures that must be preserved at all costs. I looked at my son, then at his wife, then at Victoria's kind professional face. For the first time in months, I smiled a real smile. "Actually," I said, "I think I need to discuss this with my entire family first." Scene 5. The phone call that shook everything. That evening, after Victoria left with promises to send detailed appraisal documents and auction estimates, I sat in my living room, with my phone in my hands. I had 3 calls to make, and I wasn't sure which one would be the most satisfying. First, I called Emma. My granddaughter answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Grandpa, I was just thinking about you. Did you do anything exciting today?" "As a matter of fact, I did," I said, unable to keep the smile out of my voice. "Remember those pearls you said looked like something from old movies? Your beautiful pearls? Of course. What about them?" "Well, it turns out they really are like something from old movies. They're worth $150,000. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then Emma whispered, "Grandma, did you just say $150,000? "I did indeed, and that's just the pearls. All of my jewelry that your parents called fake? The entire collection is worth $400,000. Emma let out a sound that was half laugh, half shriek. "Oh my gosh, Grandma! That's amazing! I knew your jewelry was special. I could tell just by looking at it. At least one member of my family had good instincts." "Hi, Mom," Sarah answered, sounding distracted. "What's up?" Marcus called earlier saying something about jewelry appraisals. I didn't really understand what he was talking about. "Sarah, honey, I need you to sit down for this conversation." "Mom, I don't know what to say." Marcus told me the numbers, but I couldn't believe it. $400,000? Really? Really. I feel terrible about some of the things I've said about your jewelry over the years. I had no idea. "I know, sweetheart. None of you did. What are you going to do? Are you going to keep everything?" This was the question I'd been waiting for. "Actually, Sarah, I've made a decision. I'm going to sell some pieces. Not all of them, but some. I'm going to use the money to set up trust funds for my grandchildren, Emma's college fund, and funds for your boys as well." Sarah's voice went soft. "Mom, that's incredibly generous. But," I continued, my voice taking on a steelier edge, "I'm only setting up funds for grandchildren whose parents never made fun of my jewelry or called it fake." The silence that followed was deafening. "Mom, what do you mean?" "I mean, Sarah, that Emma will receive a trust fund, but Marcus's children will not." I could hear Sarah processing this, the implications sinking in slowly, because of what Marcus and Jessica said about your jewelry. Not just what they said, honey, how they said it. The years of condescension, the mockery, the way they made me feel foolish for treasuring family heirlooms. Actions have consequences. Mom, that seems harsh. Does it? Marcus spent years telling me my jewelry was embarrassing. Jessica called it fake junk. They made me feel like a foolish old woman with delusions of grandeur. And now that they know it's valuable, suddenly they're concerned about preserving family heirlooms. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was small. You're right. What they said was cruel. I should have defended you. Yes, you should have. But you didn't participate in the cruelty either. That's why Emma will benefit from this windfall. After I hung up with Sarah, I made one more call. This one was to my lawyer. But what happened the next morning was something I never could have anticipated. The next morning I was enjoying my coffee and reading Victoria's detailed appraisal report, when Marcus and Jessica showed up at my door, unannounced, as usual. But this time they weren't alone. They had brought their children, my other grandchildren, and they were all dressed up like they were going to church. Mom, Marcus said, his smile stretched tight across his face, we wanted to come over and apologize for yesterday. We were caught off guard by the news about your jewelry, and I think we didn't react appropriately. Jessica nodded eagerly beside him. Betty, I feel terrible about the things I've said over the years. I had no idea your jewelry was so valuable, and I'm sorry if I ever made you feel bad about it. I looked at these people standing on my doorstep, my son, his wife, and their 2 children, who had been taught to disrespect their grandmother's treasures, and I felt nothing but sadness for what our family had become. We gathered in the living room, the same room where Victoria had delivered her stunning news just 24 hours before. Marcus and Jessica sat on the edge of their seats, their children fidgeting uncomfortably, clearly coached for this visit. Mom, Marcus began, Jessica and I have been talking, and we think you should reconsider selling any of the jewelry. These are family heirlooms, pieces that should stay in the family for future generations. Family heirlooms, I repeated slowly. That's interesting, Marcus. Yesterday you called them embarrassing fake nonsense. His face flushed red. I was wrong, Mom. Completely wrong. I should never have said those things. And you, Jessica? I turned to my daughter-in-law. Yesterday you said they were obviously costume jewelry, that there was no shame in having fake pieces, but that I should consider getting some quality jewelry that wouldn't embarrass me when I went out. Jessica's face crumpled with what looked like genuine remorse. Betty, I was horrible. I don't know what got into me. I was completely out of line. I looked at their children, my grandchildren, who had been raised to think of me as an eccentric old woman with questionable taste. And what do you 2 think? I asked them gently. The older boy, Michael, spoke up reluctantly. We're sorry too, Grandma. We shouldn't have laughed at your jewelry. His sister nodded in agreement. It's really pretty, Grandma. I always thought so. The lies came so easily to them now that money was involved. I walked over to my writing desk and pulled out the folder Victoria had left with me. Inside were detailed photographs of each piece, professional appraisals, and auction estimates from 3 different houses. I want to show you something, I said, spreading the documents across the coffee table. This is what real appraisers think of my jewelry. Not just Tiffany & Co., but Sotheby's, Christie's, and Bonham's as well. Marcus leaned forward eagerly, his eyes scanning the numbers. I watched his expression change as he took in the full scope of what I owned. $400,000 was just the conservative estimate. Some of the auction houses projected values as high as $600,000. This is incredible, Mom, he breathed. You're practically wealthy. And there it was. The truth, finally out in the open. This wasn't about family heirlooms or preserving history. This was about money, and the fact that they had badly underestimated the foolish old woman they'd been condescending to for years. You're right, Marcus. I am practically wealthy, and I've decided exactly what I'm going to do with that wealth. The room fell silent, everyone hanging on my next words. I'm selling the emerald ring, the diamond bracelet, and the ruby brooch. That should bring in approximately $200,000. I'm keeping the pearls and a few other sentimental pieces. I smiled, the same smile I'd practiced in the mirror that morning. I'm setting up trust funds for my grandchildren, college funds. To be specific, every grandchild will receive enough money to pay for 4 years at any university they choose. The relief on Marcus and Jessica's faces was palpable. Their children would benefit from their grandmother's newfound wealth, their financial futures secured by jewelry they'd mocked for years. But I wasn't finished yet. However, I continued, there is one condition. The trust funds will only be available to grandchildren whose parents never mocked, insulted, or made fun of my jewelry. The color drained from Marcus's face. What? What does that mean? Jessica let out a sound like she'd been punched in the stomach. Betty, you can't be serious. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up, my voice growing stronger with each word. Let me tell you about fair, Jessica. Fair would have been if my own family had treated my treasures with respect instead of contempt. Fair would have been if my son had defended me instead of joining in when his wife insulted me. Fair would have been if my grandchildren had been taught to value their heritage instead of mock it. Marcus was on his feet too, his face red with anger. Mom, this is ridiculous. You're punishing our children for something Jessica and I said. No, Marcus, I'm rewarding the grandchildren whose parents showed respect and kindness. Emma will have her college paid for because her mother, even when she disagreed with my choices, never made me feel like a fool. This is insane, Jessica spat, her composure completely gone now. You're going to destroy this family over hurt feelings about old jewelry? I looked at her with the clarity that comes from finally seeing people exactly as they are. I'm not destroying anything, Jessica. I'm simply making sure that respect and kindness are rewarded, while cruelty and condescension are not. They left that day, in a fury of slammed doors and angry voices. The children looked confused and hurt, caught in the middle of adult conflicts they didn't fully understand. But I knew I had done the right thing. 3 months later, I received a check from Sotheby's auction house for $260,000, more than even Victoria had projected. I set up Emma's trust fund the next day. Marcus and Jessica tried for weeks to change my mind, alternating between apologies and threats. But I had learned something valuable in my 73 years on this earth. When people show you who they really are, believe them. Emma calls me every week to thank me and tell me about her college plans. She wants to study art history, she says, so she can learn more about beautiful things and the stories they tell. Some stories, I told her, are worth their weight in pearls. And sometimes, the most valuable lesson isn't about what something is worth, but about how we treat the people who possess it. My family learned that lesson the hard way, but they learned it nonetheless. The jewelry box on my dresser still holds treasures, but the greatest treasure of all is knowing that respect, once lost, comes with a price tag that not even $400,000 can pay.